So today we're going to be talking about three very simple things. Okay. Yes, so we're going to be talking about three very simple things today. We're looking at what is a policy, why policies matter, and which policies NPOs like yourselves, because most of the NGBs would have been registered as NPOs, which policies you really need. Now, I was joking with my IT guy here who's sitting down 2 minutes before starting. I said, I'm going to do a session for a bunch of people who are scared after that last presentation. Yeah, they're thinking about all the money they have to pay because they didn't re-register after the 5 years. So I hope that's not the case, right? Now, we're going to talk about policy, and I'm not going to have a very technical conversation with you. I really want you to think about policy today in a really very practical manner. Now, I heard the term business being used in the last presentation, and sometimes it was being used to refer to the NPOs. I'm going to tell you how I'm going to use the word business. When I talk about a business, I'm talking about an organization that was set up primarily for the purposes of making money. It is an organization whose main aim is to make a profit. Now, when we talk about non-profit organizations, the main reason you exist, or the raison d'etre, as the French would say, is not to make money or to make a profit. So you're an NPO, so I'm going to be talking about the NGBs as NPOs, and I'm not really going to be using the word business, but we are going to talk about it a little bit later on in this presentation. Now, before we get into what is a policy, I do want to make the point that I think many persons, when they hear the word policy, they think that that's the kind of thing that happens in a business. Businesses and big businesses have policies. But many times people think, well, if we're an NPO, or even if we were to be a small business, I don't need to have a policy. A policy is something that a big business has. We're just an NPO, we're involved in sports. We don't have to have a whole set of structured policies put in place, whatever that is. We don't need that in our NPO. And today I want to tell you that policies are extremely useful. And after this conversation with you, because I really hope that it's going to be like a conversation, I really hope that most of you would be thinking at the end of this session, how do we get started in building some policies that our organization might need? So I'm starting off by talking about what's a policy. And is there anybody who would like to volunteer to have that be part of this conversation with me? What's a policy? Anyone? Just jump in. Anybody? I know I have 37 persons. Anybody? What's a policy? Just from your knowledge, or from maybe your NPO does have some policies. What's a policy? So I don't mean for you to give me an example of one, but tell me, what is a policy? What does that mean when you say you have a policy about something?
Well, I could jump in, I didn't want to take the conversation, but a policy is basically a guideline, a procedure in which helps you arrive at specific, to deal with specific matters, be it whether you have a selection policy, a discipline policy. But a policy is really to guide the organization and guide the members of the organization in which how you would treat with specific matters that before you. Simplistic.
Okay, so Mr. Roberts, you're saying that it's a guideline. Okay, anybody has any other thoughts? Doesn't have to be contradictory to what Mr. Roberts is saying, but anything. What's a policy? So Mr. Roberts says it's a guideline that directs the organization. It says how the organization should behave. So a little while ago, I was asking, basically I was getting you to think about whether you have a guideline that might either allow me to become a member, or whether you had a guideline that might say, well, my son who's blind can't cycle. I was pushing you to think along those lines. I'm not too sure I am totally in agreement with the word guideline to discuss what's a policy, but that's why we're here today.
Let's use the word procedure then. Procedure.
Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about procedure in a little while as well. But anybody else, just so I won't feel it's just me and Mr. Roberts here, anybody else, what's a policy? In the simplest of languages. I'm not a lawyer, so we're not using fancy terms. Just like Mr. Roberts said, what's a policy?
Yeah, I think a policy is a document that dictates the operations of a company, so that in the event a decision has to be made, it can be made based on the policy of the company and not any ad hoc arrangement that cannot stand scrutiny or the test of time.
Okay, great. So I like that word. You said dictates. Did you say that word, dictates?
Yes, I did.
The document dictates. And I feel that that word is a little bit stronger than the word that Mr. Roberts would have used, which was dictates. Sorry, he said guidelines, yes. And dictates is a little bit stronger than guidelines. Anybody has another take? Anything anybody else would want to say? What's a policy? What do you understand by it? So we have guidelines, we have a document that dictates. And I love that the last gentleman said, you know, we don't want our organizations just doing things ad hoc, just any old way. We need something to say, this is how we run, this is how we operate, this is what we're about, this is what we allow, this is what we don't allow, at least for now, because sometimes as an organization, we do have to revisit our, let's say, guidelines for now. We may have to revisit those, and sometimes we have to change the way we're thinking about things. Anyone else? Just one more person. What's a policy?
I would say, are you hearing me?
Yes, I am hearing you. Is it Mr. Colin Peters?
Yeah, this is he.
Okay, good. Yes, I'm hearing you, Mr.
We would
Peters.
just say rules by which we govern an organization.
Rules by which we govern an organization.
Yeah.
Yes. So I really do like the sound of that word, rules. Although rules, you know, in this day and age, people are hesitant to use that word rules, but I like the sound of it. Okay, because in organizations we need to be very clear who we are and what we are about. And as organizations grow, especially as organizations grow and also as the environment around us changes, we need to sometimes sit down and set out what are these rules by which we would manage ourselves. So for example, I started off talking about, you know, whether my son, who's 5 and loves cycling and is blind, whether he would be allowed to join your organization, well, the organization of the gentleman I was talking to. And well, I was told, of course, how joining can take place. But decades ago, someone who was blind attempting to join all kinds of different organizations might have bluntly been told, well, you can't join, you're blind. Now, of course, we know people have to be very careful about how they answer those kinds of questions. Inclusion, diversity, those are big hot topics around the world right now. So I know some organizations, if someone with a disability approaches them for membership, the organization might be calling up the attorney to make sure that they answer the question correctly. Yeah. So what is a policy? And I'm sharing this information with you. A policy is a declaration. It is your organization declaring, yeah? It is a declaration that defines the intention of a community or an organization, or declaring what are the government's goals and priorities. Policies outline the role, rules, and procedures. Policies are a little bit different from procedures, and I'm going to talk about that later on. If I don't say anything about it, I hope somebody will remind me to do so. But let me just say it again. A policy is a declaration that defines the intention of a community or organization, or it is a declaration about a government's goals and priorities. Policies outline the role, rules, and procedures. They create a framework within which the administration and staff can perform their assigned duties. So in your organization, in your NGB, and your NGBs are set up as non-profit organizations, do you have policies which help your administration and staff? And I know some of you have bigger staff than others, but still, even if your staff is just a very core group, do you have policies which help your staff to understand when they operate, when they make a decision, when they answer a question, whether they are doing so within the boundaries of what your organization has decided is the way we want to go? It's the way we want to move. It is our intention to operate in a particular kind of way. So let's continue looking at what is a policy. A policy is a principle. It's a value or course of action which guides decision making. It is a principle, it's a value, it's a course of action which guides decision making. So right now, many organizations have a policy. Hey, no mask, no service. No mask, no service. I have a policy at home. You don't come in with your shoes. If you're a guest, those shoes stay outside, because I have a 5-year-old who still thinks it's funny when you say don't lick things and touch things. He still thinks that he could, if he's rolling on the ground, he should lick it. Yeah. So we have a policy, no shoes. It's a no shoe policy. But it's linked to principle or value. We value hygiene and we value health. And it's linked to a principle, an idea that shoes somehow, shoes in the building or shoes in my home can lead to hygiene issues and health issues. So that's a policy we have. A policy can specify expectations, regulations, and guides to action. So we're talking about a simple policy like no mask, no service. That's a policy. I have a mask only policy in this organization. So then it specifies what's the expectation. You put your mask on. If you don't put your mask on, you don't come in. It tells people how to act. And that's why I'm a little not too happy with the word guidelines, because you see, guidelines could kind of sound, Mr. Roberts, like if I'm saying to people, you know, we don't really like shoes inside. And, you know, if it's okay, can you leave your shoes outside? And if somebody says, well, I really like shoes on, then maybe they'll come in with their shoes. That's just a guideline. Or, you know, maybe if I'm recommending to somebody, you know, it's not good to come inside with shoes. It's better if you take them off. That's a recommendation. But here, what I'm saying, you leave your shoes outside. I'm saying no mask, no service. I'm not saying, you know, but if you're uncomfortable with the mask, then you know, maybe you don't have to put it on. I'm not saying that. I'm saying no mask, no service. A policy can be informal, like house rules, for example, like our no shoes policy, or they could be more formal, policies governing healthy schools and workplaces, and the ones that I'm talking about here right now. Put your mask on. No mask, no service. You get your temperature checked, you do the sanitizing, or you don't enter. Those are policies. A policy, if not upheld, it leads to enforcement of some kind of consequence. And I know already you're sure to be thinking about what are the kinds of policies you would need in your organization. But we have to drill down a little bit more just to make sure we understand what is a policy. So far, it's a principle, it's a value, it's a course of action, it guides decision making. It specifies expectations, it guides actions. They can be informal, like policies at home, but they can be more formal, like in organizations. If they're not upheld, they can lead to some kind of enforcement or some kind of consequence. If you go to a restaurant and they say, we have a no mask, no service policy, they can't fine you if you don't want to put your mask on, but they can say, you're not getting in. We're not serving you. That's a consequence. And policies are shaped by environmental changes. What's going on in the political environment, what's going on in the environmental environment, what's going on in the social environment, the technological environment, what's going on demographically in terms of how people are um, grouped in your population, what's happening in the legal environment, what's happening in the economic environment. All of those things can shape policies that we implement in an organization. So for example, years back, we all know people smoked. Well, I'm talking cigarettes now. I have to update some of these examples I'm using when I'm talking about smoking. People smoke cigarettes freely everywhere. Then we ended up having some changes in the legislative framework, but of course those changes would have come at the heels of people all over. So I would say more of a social change, beginning to think differently about, if you want to smoke, should your secondhand smoke harm me? And that kind of thinking in the social world would have then started to impact on the legal framework. And those ideas started to impact some organizations to the point where even before it became illegal to smoke in a public building, there were many organizations which were saying, it's not illegal. There's no law that says you can't smoke in a public building. But here, what? In our building, in our organization, you can't. Some organizations went so far as to set up little smoking areas where smoking could take place. But organizations were making a rule for themselves, even before the law had been passed that smoking couldn't take place in public buildings. So just to go back, we're talking about what's a policy. And I'm saying that policies can be shaped by environmental changes, changes in all of the different kinds of environments that exist. Policies are also shaped by legislative frameworks, the laws in your country, fiscal measures, taxation, and in your organization, your policies can be shaped by whatever is the vision for your organization. And also, if your organization feels that it needs to change in a particular direction, then it may also want to look at changing some of its policies. Yeah? So a policy, it's a principle, it's a value, it's a course of action which guides decision making. What is a policy not? A policy is not a position paper. My position is that, I don't think people should wear shoes inside my home. It's not a guideline. A guideline is, if you do have to wear shoes inside, I really don't want you to wear shoes inside. But if you do have to wear shoes inside, then place your shoes at the corner. It's not a recommendation. A recommendation is, I really recommend that you stop wearing shoes inside homes. It's not good for you. It's not safe, especially with COVID-19. It's not good for you. A policy may begin as one of the above, but a policy is something very different. A policy is no shoes inside past this door. There's a threshold. There is a demarcation. There's a line, and after this, your shoes don't come in. It's not a recommendation. It's not a suggestion. It's not a guideline. It's not how I feel about things and what I would like to convince you to do. It's no shoes past this point. At home, that's an informal policy, but it's a policy. And in many organizations now, a policy is no mask, no service. You don't have your mask on, then that's it. You just won't get served. So it's not a guideline, it's not a recommendation. It guides the actions of your employees and your members. And if you're an NPO that has clients, if you call them clients, but it's not a guideline, it's not a position paper, it's not a recommendation. A policy is something that might begin there, but it is much more. I'm giving you an example of what a policy looks like, but I want you to pay special attention to my heading. This is a sample policy at the embryonic stage. This is like a baby policy, because if we were to fully flesh out and write out this policy, there's going to be a lot more that's going to go into it. And writing policies is a little bit of a skill that's required. And I'm not getting into the depth of how to write a policy today, but I'm just saying that this, what you're seeing on your screen, is a policy at the baby stage, at the embryonic stage. It has the core part of the policy there, but I don't want you to feel that you could take something like this and it would be the policy in its fullness. It isn't. So listen to how this is written. Guelph Soccer's tobacco-free policy. This Guelph soccer team, they have a tobacco-free policy. And this is how they've stated their intention. This is how they've stated something that they want to tell you about what they value. What's something that we value? Something that we value is something that's important to us. Listen to what they've said. All games, activities, tournaments, competitions, practices, training sessions, events, and other performances sanctioned by our organization will be tobacco free. They didn't say we don't like tobacco, but if you like tobacco, you could smoke it or snuff it or use it still. They didn't say, I know you have your right to smoke, but we just letting you know we don't think tobacco is good for people. And we don't like our main people not to use tobacco. That's not what this is saying. All games, activities, tournaments, competitions, practices, training sessions, events, and other performances sanctioned by our organization will be tobacco-free. Tobacco-free means no smoking, snuffing, dipping, or chewing tobacco by players, participants, coaches, leaders, parents, spectators, and officials within 9 meters or 30 feet of any Guelph soccer activity. So they're saying, listen, we're not even talking about premises that belong to us, Anywhere we go and we have a Guelph soccer activity, tobacco free. And we're not just talking about players, We talk about participants, coaches, leaders, parents, spectators. We're not saying that we're telling you it's not good for you. We're saying tobacco free. We will promote the tobacco free policy at all our activities by having coaches explain the policy to players or members and provide parents with a letter to review and share with others who may come to our games, practices, or tournaments. So you see that a policy really sounds more like a rule. And the rule has to be very much in keeping with what is happening in terms of your country and the legislation. It has to uphold, of course, the legislation of their land. It cannot go against it. But you can have a rule within your organization that is ahead of the country's rule. And tobacco and tobacco use, we find a good example there, as I said before, where some organizations were saying, you can't smoke here, even before the government would have created legislation to debar persons from smoking in public spaces. So when we talk about policy, we're really talking about a rule. It's like a law for your specific organization. But why do policies matter? And I know I'm talking to groups and amongst yourselves, as I said before, I know there are larger NGBs, there are smaller NGBs. Some of you have a wider group of staff. Some of you have smaller staff. Some of you have larger numbers of members and so on. But why do policies matter? Whether you're a small NGB, you're a big NGB, whether you're a small NPO, big, regardless of what is the function of your NGB or what's the sport that you're interested in, why do policies matter? And again, I'll go back to one of the common beliefs that people have. Policies are for businesses, businesses that are about making money. Policies are for big businesses because small businesses shouldn't have to bother with that kind of thing. And here I'm saying to you, or you're already getting the drift that I'm coming to tell you, policies really, really, really matter. But why do you think they do matter? Again, I'd like somebody to really remind me that I'm not just talking to a screen. I like the interaction. I like to hear some voices. Let me know I'm not here alone. Yeah? Somebody, why do policies matter? And maybe to us before now they haven't mattered enough, but just from everything that I've shared with you already, why do policies matter? Go ahead, Mr. Roberts.
It tells people how to act. Based on what you said, it tells people how to act.
Mm-hmm.
It sets out some clear, I don't want to use the word guidelines, but how you should behave, right? And what the organization stands for.
So I just want to throw out to you, Mr. Roberts, if you don't have policies, then what's going to happen? Or you run the risk of what happening?
You run the risk of individuals having their own opinion. People, you run the risk of having I would say, somewhat undisciplined organization or indisciplined organization, and lack of clarity in how you should behave.
Exactly.
Or conduct yourself.
You run the risk of one person in your organization saying, yeah, we can do that. Somebody else saying, we can't do that at all. You run the risk of chaos. You run the risk of the organization not really representing itself in the best way at all. You run the risk of chaos and looking chaotic. You run the risk of running off some of your potential donors and supporters and persons who could possibly want to partner with you. Because if you don't have the proper policies in place, then chances are somebody uses the word ad hoc. In Trinidad, we like to use another phrase, Vaiki Vai. Chances are if we don't have policies, we'll be doing things Vaiki Vai. Anyhow. And even if we're talking about NPOs, NPOs are not businesses, are not organizations, sorry, that was set up like businesses for the prime purpose of making money. But even though we are not businesses, and NPOs many times are described as organizations that are set up for the purpose of social benefit. NPOs are created to create social benefit. Even though NPOs are created to create social benefit, you don't want to be an NPO that is, yes, you weren't set up to make money, but you don't want to be an NPO that is losing money. You don't want to be an NPO that is operating in such a way that you are governing yourself and your actions using poor business practices. So that's a point that I want to make. Even if an organization is an NPO and its primary purpose is not to make money, your primary purpose is not to lose money. Your primary purpose is not to not get the best out of the resources that you have in front of you. You still want to ensure that you run that NPO, you manage that NPO and all resources that are at your disposal using good business practices, so that while money may not be the reason you exist, you manage your money and you manage all resources. You should be doing that the same way, using the best practices and the same kinds of guidelines that businesses would use. Yeah. So policies matter. I'm going to get down into more details of it, but policies matter because you don't want chaos. You don't want the ad hoc. You don't want the Vikey. We want to be able to run our organization in a manner that says that we know what we're doing. You want to run your NPO in a manner that says we are organized, we are structured, we are forward thinking, we understand the business. Although we're not primarily about making money, we understand the business that we are in, and we are in control of what happens here. Yeah. So just to share some details of this conversation about why do policies matter. You want to be able to have policies in place and have written policies in place because first of all, your policies reflect the ideology, that's the thinking and the values of your organization or institution. And it's not just about having it in writing so that somebody else could see it or you could have it up on our website. I also want to share that the process of you sitting down with your colleagues who also are associated with your NGB or your NPO, the process of you guys sitting together, huddling together to really fine-tune what is it that we are about? What is it that we value? How do we really want to behave here? How do we really want to manage things? And having those conversations and fine-tuning it to the point where you could put it down on paper and all of the minds involved in running this NPO agree on this is what we're about, that's a really very progressive step. Because it means as you move forward from there, everyone's on the same page in terms of how we're going to operate. Doesn't mean that you'll operate like that forever, as I mentioned before. Organizations always need to revisit the way they're thinking, what they value, and how they're doing things. Yeah. But just the act of thinking through, how do we think? What do we value? And to value something is to see it as dear, to see it as important. What are we about here? That's an extremely important first step to the organization moving forward with a kind of unified front, the organization moving forward in such a way that it really appears as though it knows what it is about. As we saw before in the examples, policies direct behavior. And when we have some rules which tell us every event that we are associated with will be tobacco free, and you see the language, the events will be tobacco free. When we have policies which direct behavior, those policies also start to build our culture in our organizations, our NPOs and our NGBs. The policies start to build our culture over time. So culture is not just behavior in one day or in a week. Culture is the way we do things here. And when you put policies in place, you're actually starting to build the culture that you want to see emerge in your particular organization. This is how we do things here. Policies communicate principles, which then guide action. We've kind of captured that already. Policies also act as planning tools for goal setting and service delivery. So if you have a policy in place, it tells you what are some of the things that we can do and how we're going to do it. For example, if we have an NPO that's set up in a particular village, let's say. I remember years back before we had our son, my husband is one of those men who, when it's cricket season, you can't see him again, right? And on Sundays, he's in his whites and he's out there with the village teams, right? So the village teams are playing the cricket, but sometimes they'd end up at a big bacchanal because somebody in the village who probably has a little bit of money has brought a player from Guyana and this Guyanese boy playing on the cricket team and I can't get a chance? Is there a policy that's going to guide and tell us something about, if you have to play on this team, you have to live in this area, you have to be a citizen of this country, maybe first of all, and then you have to live in our village? Because you see, without the policies, then nothing says that we can't bring a guy from Guyana who could really play cricket to come and play in village sports down in Penal, and the poor Penal boys and getting a chance on the field. Now, when you have a policy in place, it helps you to understand what you can do, what are the goals you can set, what's the service we can give to our members, our clients. It sets some boundaries. If the policy says, hey, in order to play in this particular team, you have to live here, then at some point, someone's probably going to say, but we don't have players who have the skills. And that is now going to trigger something else. Hey, maybe we need to do some kind of coaching camp. We probably need to help them get the skills. We don't have to go and get players from Guyana, because the policy already says we can't do that. So we now have to find a way to get around to solve this problem that we have. Our guys are not trained well enough. We have to provide the training for them. So the policies that are in place help us to set goals. They help us to deliver the service that we want to deliver. It helps us to problem solve as well. And again, I'm making the point that if you have a policy, it doesn't mean that you are necessarily going to stick with that policy for life. Yeah. Policies provide the terms of reference for setting program priorities and guiding program development. So just going back to the last example I was making, if we have a policy that we're sticking with people in this village or in this geographic area, then that's going to help us to figure out how to build our programs, how to develop them, what exactly we need to do in keeping with the policy which exists now, because the policy is reflecting what we believe to be valuable and important to us at this point in the life of the NPO. Policies also define the organization's role and the roles of those within the organization. Now, a little bit earlier, when I would have shown you this slide and I said this was a policy at the baby stage, and I told you that it does not show you a policy in its fullness. If you do take a look at a complete policy, then a complete well-written policy should also outline who's going to be doing what in terms of whatever your policy is about. So for example, if in your organization you need a policy about how new members come into the organization, then that policy should spell out whose role it's going to be to determine that a new member has been accepted. So policies should also spell out who's going to be doing what, who has the role or who's been assigned a particular role with regard to whatever is linked to this policy, this rule that your organization feels might be important. Yeah. So policies are the organization's rules and regulations, and they provide guidance for routine decisions, but they also provide guidance when you have unique situations and controversial decisions. And sometimes when you have unique decisions to make or controversial decisions to make, that's when you might find yourself going back to your policy, not just for guidance, but you might even be saying to yourself, hey, as an NPO, as an NGB, we might need to sit and look at this, because we might even need to revise our policy. There might be something that's happened in the world around us that has changed up the way we see things a little bit, and we might want to change this policy a little bit. But definitely, policies provide the guidance for how decision making should take place in an organization. Policies also determine or help to justify resource allocations. I was using this example when I was doing some training not too long ago. I have a small business, and it's a food business. And one of our policies in that business is that first and foremost, we are going to attempt to do business with other businesses in our immediate area. So if, for example, I have to buy some raw materials, let's say some chickens, I have to buy some chickens, based on that policy, even if it means that I have to spend a few more dollars, what I should try to do as far as possible is to buy my raw materials from the businesses close by. Because one of my aims with my business is to develop the community within which I live. You see how it's all tied back? My ideology, what I value, and what I want to do, these things they slip into my policy. So I have a policy which says, first and foremost, let's try to do business with businesses in our community. So when I have to spend $50 more, $100 more, I can justify the way I've spent that money by going back and saying, well, we have that policy here. We want to be able to do business with businesses in our area. So even if it means that we spend a little bit more, it helps another small business to survive. Yeah. So policies, I'm just using that as an example. They can help you to justify how you spend money or how you allocate resources, which is just a different way to say it. Policies can also be a tool to assist in evaluating progress and providing accountability to shareholders and stakeholders. The policies that you have and don't have speak volumes about your organization. The policies, listen to what I'm saying again, the policies that you have and the policies that you don't have speak volumes about your organization, because they tell me about what your organization thinks is important and isn't so important. Yeah. And especially when we're talking about NPOs, we're not really talking shareholders, but we're talking more stakeholders. And of course, when we're talking NPOs, we want always to be able to talk about partners. Partners and stakeholders and the general public always want to know that organizations they are becoming associated with are progressive and progressive thinking. And it is through your policies that you show what's really in the mind and heart of your organization. So your policies can show just how progressive you are. I'll just give you an example. We have all kinds of legislation now in this country about how persons with HIV have to be treated with. And HIV is not even considered to be a big thing in the world anymore at this point. I don't know if anybody remembers in the early 80s, doctors and nurses, when they had to treat a patient with HIV, they dressed up like astronauts. They were in full hazmat outfits and so on. HIV was the biggest thing. As a young child, I thought, well, the world was going to end with this thing. Yeah. They gave it the COVID treatment at that time, but it was, it was even scarier. I felt it. They gave these numbers, and with COVID, we're seeing the numbers, but I feel that back then, they almost were giving the numbers and kind of, well, at least in my child's mind, I was thinking about when are these numbers going to get to the point where it's really the end? Yeah. So anyway, HIV was a huge thing, a big thing. It was very misunderstood at first. And many people were handling HIV very poorly. And of course, it would have come to the point where HIV would have become a big thing in sports as well, and how it had to be handled in sports. Well, you would know better than me. But even before legislation came around to really say this is how we're handling persons who are HIV positive, NFM, National Flour Mills, a business, all of us know about NFM because all of us, this is a flour eating population in Trinidad and Tobago. NFM developed a policy on HIV, saying very clearly that no person who is HIV positive will be discriminated against in any way. They were the first in the country to do that. And up to this day, which is decades after that, people talk about it all the time. And when I would have first gone into HR, studying HR and becoming an HR professional, it is something that that really stuck in my mind. I hooked on to it because in my mind, here was this organization doing a really progressive thing. I didn't know anybody who was working in FM. I didn't know anything about its management. But in my mind then, and in my mind still now, how I see them, how I perceive them, because I don't know the reality of it. I don't know anything about how they operate, apart from what I knew about that HIV policy. I see them as so progressive, as so first world, as so forward thinking, just because of that policy that they decided to put in place. So what we decide to have policies about really speak to how the world will see us. You know, right now, as I mentioned before, I started off talking about it, the whole business of inclusion, the whole business of diversity. Those are really big ticket items in terms of global conversations. How's your organization handling that kind of thing? What are your organization's thoughts about diversity and inclusion? And when I talk about diversity, I'm talking about diversity in, we could talk about 6 major strands of diversity. We're talking about age. We're talking about lifestyle choices. We're talking about sex. We're talking about disability. We're talking about religion. Yeah. So do I have all 6 covered there? Age, race, religion, lifestyle choices. And when I talk about lifestyle choices, I'm talking all about the LGBTIQ concerns and agendas. Sex, meaning simply male, female, disability. Yeah. How is your organization taking all of that on board? What are your organization's intentions? What does your organization think? What does your organization value? Yeah. So policies are the organization's rules and regulations and provide guidance for routine, unique and controversial decisions. They justify resource allocations. They are a tool to assist in evaluating progress and in providing accountability to stakeholders in your case. So our policies tell us just where we are in terms of the thinking. They help us to evaluate our own progress, our own thinking. And the policies that don't exist, they help us just as much as the policies that do exist for us. If something is missing, then we might need to put it in place. Policies can contribute to society's overall development by facilitating equality and equity. And that links it to the point I was just making. So what kinds of policies do you have in place? And as I speak, you know, what kinds of policies are you thinking that you need to put in place? Policies help build a solid foundation for the organization, which may be an NPO, but which is interested. I'm making an assumption here. I want to make the assumption. Policies help build a solid foundation for the organization, which may be an NPO, your non-profit organization, but you're interested in managing yourself using the principles of good governance and good business management. You may not have been formed with the main purpose of making money, but you want to govern yourself and manage your business like a business. Policies also promote integrity, they promote transparency, and they promote accountability, because you see they're setting some boundaries, they're setting some rules about what we must do and not do. We're not leaving it up to individuals to make decisions based on just their own opinions, as Mr. Roberts would have said. Policies create structure and organization in the everyday life of the organization. And I just want to stick on that point, and it's linked to the first bullet as well. Many times when organizations start off, and they start off really small, they're micro, even NPOs, they're micro, they're so tiny. and they start growing. And what happens is it's almost as if you're growing inside out. You know, we have a skeleton inside of us, the bones, and they kind of provide us with a solid kind of framework. But many times with organizations, the body kind of grows and grows, and then only when it gets to a certain stage, then we're looking for the bones. Then we're looking for the foundation. And that's a kind of natural thing, because when an organization is very small, you won't find people sitting down to say, hey, we need policies and procedures. So organizations kind of grow in the opposite direction. They grow, they get flesh, they get bigger, they get a little fatter, and then they're saying, hey, but we need some structure, or else we're just going to be falling all over the place. We need some structure. We need a skeleton to help us to really be able to move effectively and to function effectively. Yeah. So at some point, an NPO really needs to stop and say, do I have all of the things in place that will help me to move further? Maybe I started off really small and I didn't have all of the foundation. I didn't have some of the basics that help bigger organizations to survive. But maybe I need to put some of that in place now. And just to go on to my last point on this slide, policies help to attract attractive donors and partners. You know, I'm just going to liken this to industry. At one point when health and safety were becoming big features of organizations, and 30, 40 years ago, people didn't talk health and safety in organizations. Now health and safety is like an umbrella which covers all other aspects of the life of a business or any organization. Yeah. And at one point when health and safety started to become popular and it started to really become embedded in the culture of organizations, organizations started saying, I'm not going to do business with other businesses unless they're as concerned about safety as I am. I want to do business with businesses that are concerned about safety because I'm concerned about safety. And I think it's the same way when we think about NPOs or any other kind of organization. If we want to attract the right kind of donor, the right kind of partner, if we want to get involved in the right kind of collaborations, we have to also present ourselves as attractive in the right kind of way. And having policies and having updated progressive policies which show that in this organization we're concerned about the right things. We have the thinking that is aligned to what's happening in this country in terms of the legislative framework. We have the thinking that is progressive even beyond legislation. Then that's how you're going to attract the kind of donors and partners and persons you want to collaborate with as you move into the future. So you have to make yourself attractive to attract the attractive donors and partners, and having properly written policies about the right kinds of things, that's one step in the right direction. Yeah. Policies really help us to manage ourselves in this thing that we call good governance. And good governance, you know, it's slippery in terms of being able to really define it properly. And everybody's talking about good governance. What is it? And in every organization, be it a business, be it a not primarily for profit business, whether it's small or large, we want to make sure that we're on the side of good governance. Because again, we want to be attractive to the attractive partners. And when we talk about good governance, these are some of the things that are associated with good governance. We must run ourselves, we must run our operations in a way that we're inclusive. Remember, I use that term. We want to make sure that we're on the side of diversity. We want to make sure that we're on the side of inclusivity. We don't want to leave anybody out. We do not want to discriminate. These are buzzwords right now, but they're buzzwords, not just that they're buzzwords. If we don't pay attention to them and manage how we manage ourselves, we can soon find ourselves in big trouble with the law. We want as NPOs to make sure that when we're managing how we do things, we want to follow the rule of the law. And you would have gotten quite a bit to chew on from this morning's first presenter. Are we on the right side of the law? Are there things that we didn't know we were supposed to do, but now that we know, we're going to put those things in place. We also want to be efficient. Whatever resources we do have, whether it's people, whether it's people's time, whether it's money, and people's time can always be valued and turned into dollars anyway. We want to make sure that we're using those resources in the most efficient manner. We don't want to be on the newspapers for the wrong thing because we haven't been using resources well or efficiently. We want to be accountable. You know, I used to work at a state enterprise, and I like to tell the persons who worked with me all the time, every dollar that we spend belongs to the taxpayer. Every dollar that we spend belongs to the children of this country. Well, you're an NPO, and some of your funds may come from the children of this country. Some of your funding may come from the government, but some of your funding may come from elsewhere. Are you accountable? Can you show what you've done with every single dollar? You need to be accountable. As an NPO, you also want to be transparent. Hey, this organization, it's not about mystery and secrecy and, you know, well, this thought just jumped into my mind. When I was a child, I always used to hear my grandfather talking about a lodge, and everything in the lodge was secret. You know, we don't know how they operate. We don't know how you could become part of the lodge. We don't know where the lodge meets. You know, we don't know what the lodge does with its money. Hey, when we're talking about NPOs, and when we're talking about businesses, and NPOs are not businesses, and I keep hammering it home, but you are an NPO who wants to run your operation along the lines of good business, you're not a lodge. There's no secrecy in what you're doing. There's no mystery. We don't know who's really part of this association, and we don't really know how we make rules, and there's some secret ring that people kiss and things just magically happen. When we're talking about an NPO, and there is a legislation that governs how you must operate, then everything that you do must be transparent. You must be completely opposite to that long-time lodge I'm thinking about here now. When you make decisions and when you operate, you must also be responsive. And when I say responsive, what I mean is responsive to the needs of your members and responsive to your clients. If some of you differentiate between clients and members, or sometimes there's an overlap, and even to those in your employ or to those who serve you, you have to be responsive to those you serve. When you operate, you also want to make sure that you operate in a way that is participatory. In this day and age, no one wants to be part of an association or an organization where a dictatorship is happening. And no one wants to support that kind of organization either. People want to be part of, and people want to be associated with organizations which are governing themselves in such a way that people and the people they represent are being allowed to participate. And then the last point I have here is consensus oriented, and that's linked to participation. All organizations are, in this point in the history of the world, charged with the challenge of employing consensus. Consensus really means that you try to get as much persons on board with whatever ideas you are putting forward as your own. Yeah. So these are some of the things that are associated with good governance. And I've just put this up here because I know at this point you're thinking about, well, what are some of the policies that we need? They're rules, but what are we about? And what's important for us? And I'm just going to talk through some that I really believe NPOs and NGBs in particular, and these NGBs that are represented here today in terms of representing sport, these are some that you really do want to consider. I'm not suggesting that you sit down and try to write out policies for each one of these things on your own in the next couple of days. Writing policies really takes a lot of thinking and effort, starting with the whole conversation about who are we, what do we value, what are the things that we want to do, and how do we want to see ourselves operating. But these are some that I really want you to think about creating for yourselves if they don't already exist as you move into the future. Yeah. So which policies do NPOs really need? Membership policies. And a membership policy is critical because it's going to speak to who can become a member and how. Who's allowed to become a member? Who's not allowed? And if you're not allowed, why aren't you allowed? Yeah. And what's the process? And just to go back to Mr. Roberts, I said that I would talk a little bit about the difference between policy and procedure. We're not getting into the details of that today, but just because you brought that word procedure into the conversation. The policy is the rule, but the procedure has to do with the step-by-step how you do something. So for example, you might have, or an organization might set up a membership policy saying that anyone over the age of 18 who's interested, I'll use an organization that I'm associated with. I'm associated with Blind Welfare Association. And Blind Welfare Association has a membership policy that says anyone who's over the age of 18 who's interested in working with us to further the cause of persons who are blind or visually impaired, anyone can become a member. You don't have to be blind or visually impaired. So that policy says anyone over the age of 18, you could live in Trinidad, you could live outside of Trinidad, you can become a member. But the procedure for becoming a member is really the step-by-step, which tells you where you have to get a form, what you have to fill out, how much money you have to pay, that kind of thing. So a procedure has to do the step-by-step in terms of how you do something. It's different from the policy, which just talks about the rule. So even with that no tobacco or tobacco-free policy that I gave you the example of before, there might be a procedure which is linked to that policy, a procedure for disciplining a player who smokes at an event. That would now be a step-by-step in terms of what do we do in order to discipline a player if that player has acted in a way that is contravenous to our policy. So procedure is really a step-by-step of how to do things. The policy is the general rule. So on this slide here, I attempted to put some policies or the names of policies down, which could help an NPO to manage their people. And when I say manage people, I'm talking about your clients, your members, or persons who are your directors or your employees. Anything to do with people. So the first one, as I said, is a membership policy. Who can join? Who can't join? The procedure will tell you how to go about joining. You may want to look at an overall HR policy. And that HR policy might look at different things. If we have to hire somebody into this NPO, how do we go about hiring them? If we have to fire them, how would we fire them? Yeah. What would we do to get rid of them? What do we do to replace a director who has died, for example? What's the thinking behind it? And then the procedure might tell us the actual step by step. So HR policies are policies that you might want to look at as you move forward. A code of ethics policy. That's a really critical policy. How will we behave here? What are the expectations in terms of how we behave? And this kind of policy may be a kind of overarching policy that then may have some, there might be some breakout policies under there. But if we go back to the example I showed you before, the tobacco-free policy, it was clearly stating you're not going to smoke or snuff or do anything associated with tobacco once you're at one of our events. And it doesn't matter where the event is being held. So a code of ethics policy, how you behave, how you operate, how you speak about this organization. code of ethics policies, and this kind of slips over into some organizations have a communications policy. It might even speak about who speaks. Some organizations have a rule. Well, the executive director is the only person to speak. Not everybody could go out there and meet with the media and speak on our behalf. So code of ethics policy, that's something you might want to look at. And again, policy work is not just about sitting down and writing. It's really about getting your minds, the decision-making minds, the controlling minds, to use it, a phrase. Well, I'm kind of twisting her phrase. She talked about the minds, the mind of the NPO being considered the controller. Well, you would want to get the persons who control in the organization, or the persons who represent the minds, together, to come together to really answer the questions, how do we want to operate? That's what policy work is all about. Another policy that is really important for every NPO, every business at this point in time, is some kind of equal opportunity policy, some kind of affirmative action policy, some kind of anti-discrimination policy, some kind of diversity policy, some kind of inclusion policy. All of those phrases kind of overlap, or we might be saying the same thing in different ways. But what you don't want to have is a policy that excludes anyone. You don't want to have a practice. You don't want to be in the practice of excluding anyone. And you do want to have it well thought out. How are you going to go about the business of, when you are approached at some point in time in the future, or when you are called upon to account or to speak, how am I going to deal with or handle the business of showing that I provide equal opportunity and access to everyone? Yeah, I do not discriminate based on anything. So equal opportunity policy, affirmative action policy, anti-discrimination policy, diversity, inclusion, those are things for people to seriously think about at this point. And anti-harassment policy. That is also important in any organization, any association, and it's kind of linked to the bullet point above, which talks about equal opportunity, affirmative action, and these things they're red hot at this point in the history of the world, and that's why I'm suggesting that all organizations and associations deal with it at this point. Substance abuse policy. And for organizations that represent sport, you must be very clear on this kind of thing. Substance abuse policy. And we're not just talking about players. If we go back to the example I put up a little while ago with the Guelph soccer team, they're saying, hey, we're tobacco free. We're talking parents. We're talking spectators. We're talking coaches. We're talking leaders. We're not just talking players. We're serious about this no tobacco thing. We're serious about tobacco free. So in terms of your NPOs, what is your position? And that's a policy is not a position, but you thinking through, what's our position? How do we think about the whole business of substance abuse? In fact, what is even a substance? You know, you have to do that thinking through so that you could put this thing in writing, in black and white, after your minds have come together to decide, how are we going to handle this situation in our particular NGB? Of course, in light of the legislative framework in this country, but your policies can even be ahead of the legislation within your country. Yeah. A whistleblowing policy. What's whistleblowing? Whistleblowing is really the act of, in an organization or an association, being able to, if I see something going on that's not correct, it's not right. A whistleblowing policy says that a person who attempts to voice that feeling or to speak up, that person is not going to be discriminated against. And the whistleblowing policy not only says people have a right to speak up, and people who want to speak up to say that something that's not supposed to be happening is happening, not only will they not be victimized, but we have a procedure in place, we have a step-by-step in place to allow them to be able to voice their opinion. Some people want to say who they are, they want to say their names. Some people want to be anonymous. We have something set up, we have a system set up. That's the procedure to allow you, if you're part of this NPO or part of this NGB, to safely voice your concern or your opinion about something. This kind of policy has become very popular in organizations which see themselves as progressive. Again, it goes back to the whole idea that people should be able to speak up and have a voice and to raise their concerns without being penalized or victimized. An organization that has a whistleblowing policy instantly, it raises a flag in my mind that this organization is thinking along the lines of rights and human rights and equality and level playing fields and doing things in such a way that no one feels victimized or hard pressed. And even if somebody has a concern, they can share that concern safely. When we're talking about managing people, a discipline policy, and discipline is a kind of word that people don't like much right now. It's kind of akin to control. And I was doing a session recently, a management training session, and I was saying, well, managers, they're all about planning, organizing, controlling, and motivating. But I want to stress that when I talk about control, I'm not talking about controlling people. I'm talking about putting controls in place to help us to control systems and control resources, not control people. In the same way, a discipline policy, discipline is a kind of word that sounds a little bit archaic. And maybe we can say consequence management. But organizations do have to think in terms of consequences, because once we're talking rules, then we have to talk about consequences. The consequences of not abiding by the rules. What happens? How do we operate here? Yeah. And it doesn't mean that every time we're talking about a consequence that a consequence is a fine, or that you're going to be debarred or you're going to be excommunicated. But a simple consequence of not wearing your mask at some businesses is that you simply won't be let in. We're not going to call the police for you, but we're simply not going to serve you. So you also have to think about, as an organization, if you have rules, then what happens if people don't follow the rules? And by people, I mean the people who are your directors, the people who are your employees, the people who are your members, people who are your clients, the people you serve. Yeah. So you can look at policies in terms of rules which will help you to manage your people, but you can also look at your policies in terms of rules that will help you to manage your money. So most organizations should attempt to put in place for themselves a finance policy. And that finance policy may include the procurement policy, or the procurement policy may be a little bit separate. But the finance policy is going to tell us, where do we get money from? Where will we accept money from? And some of that was covered by the speaker before. And how do we manage the money? When we spend the money, who authorizes the spend? Or do we have different controls in place when we spend different amounts of money? Yeah. So how do we manage money that we make? How do we make money? How do we manage money that gets donated to us? And how do we manage the spend of money? All of those things should be clearly articulated in writing. If no other policy needs serious consideration, the finance policy needs serious consideration. Yeah. Procurement policy. How will we buy goods and services? Is there some sort of rule that we must follow? Or do we just buy from our goods and services from our friends and family? Because, I mean, that would be easiest. Of course not. Yeah. So what rules then would guide us? So as an organization, we have to sit And I'm talking about as simple as buying lunches when we have a cricket game to bigger things. We want some training and development. Are we talking about uniforms? Are we talking about transport? How are we going to access these goods and services in a way that we are comfortable as individuals within the NPOs? And how can we operate being comfortable as an NPO, that we are doing things in such a way that we are managing and utilizing our resources in the best way possible. As I said before, just to go back to the little example I use, every single dollar that comes from government funding that belongs to every poor child you see out there was supposed to get a little piece of that pie, a little piece of that taxpayer's dollar. So when we're spending it, we have to make sure we're spending it right. When we're using it, we need to make sure that we're using it right. When people donate funds to us, we have to put their money to good use. And of course, money is always scarce. It's always a scarce resource. All resources are scarce resources. So we want to always make sure that we're putting resources to the best use. Many organizations see it fit, and they should see it fit, to put a conflict of interest policy in place. And much of what I just touched on with regards to finance and to procurement has to do with conflict of interest. We want to make sure that we're doing things in such a way that even when we do business with people who we know, who we are friends and family with, even if we continue to do business with them as NPOs, that they are not gaining from any kind of unfair advantage by virtue of our doing business with them. So I'm not trying to make deals. I'm not doing any sweetheart deals with anybody so that, I'm looking to, we have a little bit of money to spend here, but I'm going to try to give my cousin a walk, or give him a deal, or give him a little chance to eat a food. But the food usually costs $50, but I'm going to pay him $75 instead because he's out of work, and I really want to make sure, I set him up nicely because I have a chance to. But there's a conflict of interest there. If it is that the food really should cost 50, in fact, if it's your cousin, you should declare the relationship and see if you could get him to do it for 30, right? So we want to make sure that we are managing the money in a way that we feel comfortable that we are, to the best of our knowledge and ability, doing the right thing. And our policies will help us. I want to urge all not to see the whole business of policies as something so complicated and so onerous, and I want to stay away from it. It's complex. I'm scared of it. But see policies as something that could really help to defend us and to protect us if ever our actions come under scrutiny. Because if we develop good policies and then we abide by them, we are going to find protection in our policies, and we are going to find comfort when we act in accordance with the policies, knowing that we are doing the right thing. Yeah. And of course, there are policies which help us to manage information. Policies on document retention and document control. Sometimes they're called different things. And even communication policies, as I said before. And these might tell us who speaks and who speaks when, and how much information is communicated, and which information is confidential. I know the former speaker would have talked about the need for certain documents to be kept for certain periods of time, 7 years in one instance. I heard her talk about 6 years in another instance. Yeah. So how you manage your information, you should have a policy about that. Okay. I'm not sure what happened. I'm just hearing a little bit of
All right, she's back. Okay, great.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Just one before. Yes. So we talked about policies that could help you to manage your people. And by people, I was using people very broadly. As I said, your directors, people who work for you, people who assist you, but also your clients and your members. And you can also have policies that will help you to manage your resources, your money, a finance policy, a procurement policy, conflict of interest policy. And you can also have policies which help you to manage your information. They will remind you that your information needs to be guarded in a particular kind of way, that your information needs to be shared in a particular kind of way. And this is why policies help us every single day. You can also have policies which will help you to guard the reputation of your NPO. And going back to the point I made earlier, we always want to be able to attract the most attractive partners. And setting up proper policies to help ourselves make sure that we're behaving in the best way possible, that's a great start. A gift policy. We want to make sure that, yeah, they're donations and they're donors, but are we open to just accepting gifts from anybody? And what kind of gifts are we talking about? I mean, some mangoes from your backyard is a very far cry from a new car. Yeah. So gift policies, many organizations have them, and they will talk about the value of the gift. Yeah. So I used to work in the bank many years ago. So we knew, all right, you could take some doubles from the customer. You could take some mangoes. You could take a box of cookies Christmas time, but that's about it. Even when you started to get into the realm of tickets for events, because if you think about it, tickets for an all-inclusive fete, well, not in 2021, in 2022, we hope, right? According to how things go, 2 tickets for a fete could be a really high-priced gift. Yeah, so your gift policy might actually want to place a ceiling, a monetary value, a ceiling on the kind of gifts your directors or your representatives, your employees may want to take. Again, what you're trying to do is really to guard your reputation. Yeah, you may have a corporate social responsibility or fence line community or community development kind of policy. And this policy might talk about, as I had mentioned before, how you go about including persons from your immediate geographic area, what kinds of things you might engage in with the community, and what you want to do with the community, what you would do and what you won't do. But these are some of the things that can help you in terms of building your reputation. But just to stress the point that one of the ways to build your reputation overall would be for you to sit down and think through a comprehensive and complete suite of policies altogether. Because when someone sees an organization that has a set of policies that appear to be progressive and well thought out, then that in itself speaks volumes about the organization. Yeah. So today we had set out to talk about 3 simple things. What's a policy? Why we need policies? And what are some of the policies that NPOs should be thinking about? And we have covered just that. Yeah. So I don't know if there are any questions or comments. I put my contact up here if there is a need for anybody to make contact with me and seek any further information. I would be willing. Yes, so ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for listening. I really hope that you spend some time. I was hoping to provoke you into, tonight, instead of just falling peacefully to sleep. I hope that you'd be tossing and turning and thinking about policies instead. It's better that you take a kind of proactive stance with these issues than you find yourself in an organization where a controversial situation comes up. And then you're asking yourself, but how do we really feel about this? Or how should we act? We don't have a policy to guide us. Organizations should always be thinking ahead, looking at what's going on around them in the world and asking themselves, how do we feel about that? Who are we in this particular context? And what are the rules that we're going to set for ourselves? So I'm going to end off here if there's nothing else. Thank you very much for participating with me, and for the three gentlemen who ensured that I didn't feel like if I was just talking to a screen. Thank you so much. That would have been Colin and Mr. Roberts, and there was one other gentleman, I think Leroy. I'm not sure if that was the name. So and a special thank you to you. Yes, Kevin?
Good afternoon again, everyone. If you have any questions, as usual, just raise your hand and we will refer to you. Justin, I don't know if you want to do a quick wrap up. So we'll be taking questions, if there are any, until 1:30. I will give you all a few minutes to decide if you want to.
And Kevin, if you have their emails, you're free to send this out to them. So.
All right, so I'm going to take the lack of raising of hands to mean that there are no questions. Bunny, thank you very much for the time. Oh, okay, Mr. Roberts has a question.
I can't leave Buny to go. Just one question. And just for the information. So in our constitution, right, it speaks to different classes of membership, right? And it speaks to say, it basically speaks about ordinary membership and gives some idea on procedure, life membership, honorary membership, and club membership, right? With respect to establishing a membership policy, is it still necessary to have something like that?
Okay.
If it's expressed in your constitution.
Okay, so are you hearing me, Mr. Roberts?
I'm hearing you.
Okay, great. So I would have to say that it depends. Now, one of the things that you definitely would want to do is in building a policy, it has to be extremely aligned to what's in your constitution. You can't go outside of what's in your constitution. But many times what you would find is that organizations or associations, they have constitutions, but the constitution sometimes becomes aged, one, and two, as the organization proceeds, there are all kinds of little questions and concerns that come up, and not all of that is covered by the Constitution. So that you find the policy then sometimes takes a kind of more thorough view. That may be the case. Now, I'm not seeing your Constitution, so I don't know the extent to which your Constitution really is as thorough as it could be. But so what I could say is that if you were to build a policy on membership, and I don't know if you need to, I would only know that if I were to see the Constitution, but if you build one, then you have to make sure that it is tied back, it is aligned, it's speaking the same thing. Now, the other thing is this. You might find that an organization has a whole bunch of policies, a suite of policies, and because your constitution speaks to something, it doesn't mean that you would necessarily want to leave out a policy on something that's so important. And the policy might be something that you might share more freely, or it might even be written in a language that people might be able to access a little bit easier. You might find that people don't want to sit down and read a whole constitution, but a policy that could be written in a little bit less formal language, not that it's informal, but the language might be more accessible to more persons. And that policy might now be part of a whole group of policies which talk about how the organization operates in total. You might find people might go to that. So it's not that it's going to say something different. It's going to be sending the same message, but you can still have one even though you have the information in the Constitution. And you can have the details of it will really depend on the extent to which your Constitution goes into details. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for this.
Welcome.